This week we're looking at the noble Prince of Peace, and these words come to us very easily from Isaiah chapter 9 because we sing them so often at Christmas time in Handel's Messiah. And I want to remind you of some of those thoughts that are there in this particular study for this time. People walking in the dark will see a bright light. A light will shine on those living in the land of total darkness. And that's actually referring to Galilee of the foreigners there in verse 1. That place that was looked down upon by those in Judea as not really being worthy of being part of God's people of Israel. But God, in his wisdom, chooses to use someone who comes from Galilee, speaks with a Galilean accent, even though, of course, he was born in Bethlehem. And then we have these words, which are so powerful. For a child will be born for us. A son will be given to us. He will bear the responsibility to rule. He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His rule and the peace he brings know no limits and will never come to an end. He will sit on David's throne and rule his kingdom, making it secure. He will operate from principles of justice and goodness from the time he begins his rule and for all eternity. The Lord Almighty is determined to make this happen. Now, of course, we understand those words as applying to Jesus, and surely they do, but for the people at the time, they probably were thinking more in terms of an earthly ruler or somebody who was going to come and take over. What they did with the line that he will rule for all eternity, I don't know. Certainly they had a perspective of hope, and surely through all those dark times under Roman occupation, back in the exile, all these words must have been of tremendous comfort to God's people. Of course, the tragedy was that so many of them had gone astray and they did not want to know this noble Prince of Peace. In fact, I would hazard a guess that they would have rather had some kind of militaristic leader, somebody who was going to fight against their oppressors and liberate them. Certainly, there are a lot of those in Jesus' time. Even one of Jesus' followers is called Simon the Zealot. The Zealot party were the revolutionaries dedicated to taking back their country. And of course, that meant taking it back by force because the Romans weren't going to just walk out and leave and hand over the country peaceably. That was for sure. So here we have the noble Prince of Peace. Now, that's all well and good. Now, but I want to set that in the context of the great controversy. God has made his position very clear. He believes in freedom. He does not believe in using force to compel people to believe. He believes in people having freedom to choose whether to follow or not. That's why we have free will, freedom of choice, the ability to decide for God or not, to love him or not, because you cannot have love, true love, unless you have the opportunity not to love. And so God has placed us in this universe, along with every other sentient thinking being, to decide whether we want to follow God's way or not. And so when it comes to the Prince of Peace, it's clear that God isn't going to force his way. This is why Jesus comes to show us that God does not compel or force. He is not one who is antagonistic or in any way tries to force us. He would love us to come to him. He will plead with us and so on. But there is no compulsion. There is no compulsion in following God because he only wants people who follow out of love. That's what I get out of this particular lesson. I encourage you to read the words again, to be inspired again, but to look beyond them and to see the meaning in the whole context of the chapter. chapter 9 of Isaiah and ask yourself, well, what is really God trying to say? What is he especially saying to me today?